Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode 5 of 666 of the iPetGoat 2 series. And we're joined by Armunn again. Hello, Armunn.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm very well. I'm very well. So just before we jump into, the new set of scenes or scene, depending on how much we get through today, there was a really interesting comment someone brought up, and it's actually something I didn't even quite um, fully realize when I was looking at this, even in my notes. But it's a really superb point, and it regards basically chess and the C7. If I can find this, yeah. So the individual said, "quote." I like where you're going with this, but note C7 in chess is checkmate, and they are on a checkered board in that Apple scene. And I mean, it's an absolute superb point because interestingly, C7 is, and I actually had to look this up because it's something I had actually forgotten. I played chess in my youth, but yeah, so C7 is on the queen side on black. If you develop your pawn too quickly, prematurely, and it's undefended, it can actually invite white to, um, engage in a coordinated attack on that c7, which is a critical point for black, and it makes black from the early to mid game. If white successfully exploits that, it makes black, highly vulnerable, should we say, and it can collapse black's defense. It can force checkmates, and basically it involves and leads to what's called a royal fork. Um, so the idea is that I think being evoked in that is that the notion, and this is why you see Obama, which is of the black or the abyssal side, he sweats because he's almost understanding that the black forces, the evil or abyssal forces, the forces of Negredo or putrefaction, that they themselves are going through a structural collapse. That Lily, the white side, plays this move against, of course, the black of Obama. He's in a black suit and what have you. That because she's played this move, this sort of unseen move where the lotus emerges from the broken apple or fruit of knowledge, if you will, that itself is almost exploiting black's weakness here. That black's hubris itself has opened up this exploitable avenue of the C7, and also it's led to well, effectively a royal fork, right? A structural collapse, an overextension by black, in a sense. It's also related to the Sicilian defense, but that's I only really vaguely remember that. So it can be used for, if it's, if it's a sort of, it can be used as a ruse by black as well in the Sicilian defense, but that's beyond my recollection right now. Something else to mention too. Somebody stated that where is it? Oh yeah, interestingly too, the white equivalent of this, where black can exploit white, is on the C2 square, which interestingly to C2, C7, 27, obviously 3 to the power of 3 equals 27 or 33. And somebody else mentioned another thing. It was, if you want to jump in, man.
Well, I'm a bit confused about C7 being checkmate. I've never seen that notation in terms of the square itself. I think F7 is usually the focus. F7 and G7 is usually because after the Black King castles, those are usually, in fact, it would be F, G, and H7 that would be the focus of White's attack. But unless there's something that I'm escaping, and I would ask the commenter to expand upon that if possible. I don't see c7, although of course every square is potentially important in a game, as being related specifically to checkmate. I honestly don't see that, but I do see the point that you rose, yes, and it could be related to a move for sure. However, I really don't connect the two, the checkmate and the c7, to be honest.
No, it's definitely not. It can become a checkmate if you play the white knight up to c7, and of course if black completely leaves it, just prematurely develops the pawn. But
so
yeah,
it's basically any move can be a checkmate. It
oh,
depends on the
absolutely, yeah,
context. So
yeah, absolutely. No, I
so
agree. So
yeah.
I think he's incorrect there. It's definitely not an end. It doesn't relate to the end game, but it does. It can, of course, deny. If you develop the white knight there, it can deny the castling and such. But
if we're considering
yeah.
a white pawn reaching c7, that is passed, right? So the pawn is past the pawn line and potentially can form a queen or whatever other higher value piece in the next move. It could mean a white pawn passed pawn, I mean, in that regard, because being only c7, it refers to a pawn. Otherwise, in notation, if it was a knight, it would be n. If it was a rook, it would be r. Bishop b, queen q, and king k. Right. So being without that first letter defining the piece, it always refers to a pawn. So if we're talking about a move c7, it means that it's a pawn that moved to c7, and the only pawn that can move to c7 would be a white pawn, right? Because the black starts there. So if that is what is being referred to, I understand that it is a potentially a promotion in the next move. But I would nonetheless ask kindly the commenter, I didn't see that comment, to expand upon it and clarify a bit more.
Absolutely, but I find it was an interesting thing that didn't really cross my mind when I was looking at this.
As a chess move, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and another thing as well that somebody mentioned was that that 7, that upside down 7 or slanted or oblique L, is also it's a letter. And God, I didn't even realize this either. So that I believe it's a sort of, he states it represents a velar nasal sound like a n, or out of sing. It's from the Juyin alphabet, Bopo Mofo, used in Taiwan, and this ng sound is the 33rd letter. So of course the 33 itself is interesting. C is obviously the third letter too. So you've got the 333. I believe 333 in Hebrew gematria, because of course it's an alphanumeric system. Therefore, the letters represent numbers as well. But I believe that relates. It's something to. I believe it's something to do with Metatron. I forget specifically now, but it indicates this sort of demiurgic essence, or a relation there too. There's something else that was mentioned too. Oh, well, also to mention on that is obviously the human vertebra, usually, not all the time, but usually has 33 vertebrae in it. You also see this in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, where you have 33 steps out of Purgatory. I believe you have 33 cantos of Paradiso, and so on and so forth. You also can relate this as well to. I actually made note of this, if I can find it. You've also got the so you've got 33 steps of the spine to reach the brain or the upper chambers of heaven. 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. That's of course well known. There's several 33s. I believe the second highest heaven in Mahayana Buddhism is I forget the Sanskrit, but it translates to the heaven of the 33. So you've got loads of 33s everywhere. You know, this 33 is found in absolutely every mystery school and, of course, exoteric religion as well. Of course, Christ was 33 when he died on the cross, supposedly, and you see that King David ruled Jerusalem, or ruled from Jerusalem, for 33 years, so on and so forth. The name of God, Elohim, which may be the majestic plural in some theological critiques, is mentioned exactly 33 times in the book of Genesis. So, and of course, you've got the 33 supreme deities in Hinduism. The Rig Veda explicitly states this. They're known as the Tridasha. So that's rather interesting too to mention on that.
Yes, it is obviously one of the key numbers in blueprints, and it has been applied several times and in various different cultures, for sure. This does not necessarily imply, because there are some that think that the numbers themselves hold some sort of, energetic power or whatever it is. I think that no, because numbers do not per se as a concept exist in nature, in the organic world. It's a human concept to count or to work with in relation to measurement of the world that is perceived. And of course, it is a tool and it has its function, but I do not think that it has a particular power on its own. However, if you are able to constantly and continuously program into the memory room the, let's say, a significance to a symbol such as a number, of course, when you apply its trigger, when you see that number, it will bring up that programmed response, or that programmed, thought or sense or interpretation, right? So here we should, in my opinion, just tread carefully in the sense of making a disclaimer between what we are interpreting here, and at least from my perspective, is what may have been the programs and the triggers applied upon the narratives pre-installed from what would otherwise organically be there, right? Because even, you can consider 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. These numbers do not exist. You understand? You even if you count. Okay, let's count apples, right? We're counting. We're seeing an apple here. Let's count apples. But even if you count apples, that's your concept. You understand? And it's useful. Again, it's a tool. It's useful, but that doesn't exist, because two apples, you can't count something that isn't exactly the same. There's no apple that is exactly the same as the next one, right? So you would count what exactly? Yeah, it's similar, but it's not the same, right? And even if you measure the measurement, there's that mathematical problem of, if you keep approaching the exact measurement of something, it never ends, right? You continue, you never reach the exact measurement, right? If you subdivide and subdivide and subdivide, even microscopically, because it can't be measured. That is the whole point. Yes, we measure in a functional manner, like, you want to build something, you measure, and it's always by approximation, if we really look at it, right? But what I'm trying to say is that in itself, by itself, independently, does not exist. So the power that it may wield over the psyche is a power that has previously been programmed into it, into the memory room by, several means, such as, of course, media and religion and symbology. That's why you find it everywhere, right?
That's an absolutely astute point. Yeah. So all of these things are ultimately abstractions. They only have value, no pun intended, within the mind itself. So absolutely. Another thing to mention just really quickly on this, and then we'll move on, man, is that you see if the lotus, the apple cut in half, someone mentioned that it's almost akin to this notion of the mirror, right? But again, nothing is perfect. We see this with the seeds. And someone mentioned as well that this may relate to the XX and XY, which is also a sort of interesting concept to explore with this. And you see this this mirror, which can also be similar to the lotus pads that we saw on the back of the calves of Christ on the boat, and the lotus emerging from this, where like in almost an entwined or constricted toroidal field, similar to Birkeland currents and how they function, that they intertwine. And this is known, I believe, as the lemniscate. And this is, again, it's a mirror that forms an 8, which is the symbol of infinity. It's also, again, as stated, it's also known as the lemniscate. This is found within torus fields, in esoteric, in the unified, in field theory. The torus, or a donut-shaped energy field, is the fundamental shape of a self-sustaining universe. It's almost akin to a sort of closed loop. So the energy flows out from the center, loops around the edge, and pulls back into the center in a continuous figure-8 motion. This is also found in Birkeland currents, as mentioned, and you see the same thing with the heliocentric model as well, whether it's correct or incorrect. You see this. The electromagnetic field of the Earth is produced vis-a-vis this sort of Birkeland current, and or field-aligned currents. I believe. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I was finished. Please jump in.
What I find fascinating in that postulation there, which is correct, is that all these symbols that you mentioned, the figure 8, which if you put it sideways, it's the infinity. It also links to the hourglass shape, right? It's all of them relate to time, right? And in the previous episode, we were talking about time and Saturn, which is an important narrative archetype. Is the ruler of time, and we mentioned how, or at least I mentioned how Saturn is the actual limiter by time. Nothing will be eternal per se. It will always be limited. It will always have a lifespan, let's say a period where it will expire. And all of these symbols actually is an attempt to define time as never ending, right? So continuous, self-sustaining. Even the hourglass, the only thing you need to do is to turn it over and it starts again, right? And this is, in my view, a way to set into the memory room this idea that it is absolutely inevitable that the status quo remains the same despite cyclical resets or cyclical turns of the mask, let's say, or changes of the mask that may be applied. But I think it's interesting that all these symbols that you mentioned are associated with time.
Yes, and back to your point as well, because I think it's a really profound one. And someone mentioned, I think it was in the discussion that I've been having with Eros, all of these various discussions, he stated that Of course, he took a rather religious bent but I thought it was interesting because he stated all of these concepts are ultimately abstractions, and I totally agree with them. Of course, you have to explore these abstractions to sort of glean the truth of the power which rules over you, because they are the authors of this sort of abstractionism, which in and of
Right.
itself is similar to this sort of intertwining, constrictive sort of electoral, the electromagnetism that's the field, if you will, that controls all of society. Like what you're saying, that perpetuates its own kernel, its own seed, which germinates cycle after cycle. Because ultimately, what you're doing is you're infect this system, if you will, is infecting the mind of even the survivors, those who even see that it is an illusion. They're still infected by the abstractions, um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which almost perpetuate this thing infinitely. Because ultimately, again, if you may see this society, this system of power as pure illusion, right? Which it rightly is, but ultimately, because your mind has been so poisoned by the abstractions authored by them, of course, unwitting to your from your own perspective,
Right.
you don't realize that there is no other. You don't realize that in fact you're merely the seed carrier for the same sort of system. You know,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And we've discussed in the past how people like us would probably become or potentially become the elites of the future, right? Because there would come a point where they would, realize, yes, this is really the only way, and we have to apply the same structure in order to maintain order, let's say, right? But I think that the one of the key components of all this is that there is a intertwining or a confusion, if you like, a mixing between what is functional, abstractions that are functional, and what is the organic world. And what I'm trying to say here is, okay, like in the case of measurement, which can be a measurement of time. We were talking about time. Sure, okay, 1 minute, right? We can agree upon that, 1 minute is this amount, and we find tools to count that amount, right? And that has a functional value. It is very useful. If you're doing your cooking, for example, you need to calculate the amount of time that it's in the fire. Sure, you use that as a tool. The thing here is, and as I've discussed in my book, is that concept, that measurement, then becomes the whole thing. So instead of having, okay, I have this reality that works as it works, right? That is as it is, right? And I apply an abstraction onto it to facilitate my interaction with it, which is perfectly fine and healthy and okay. The thing is, when I become so entangled in the abstraction, so for example, in the measurement of time, right, that the organic reality ceases to exist in my perception, and only the abstraction exists, right? I don't know if you're following me here, right?
Oh no,
uh,
absolutely.
what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say. So, 1 minute to a person such as that becomes an absolute. You understand? While in the organic sense, 1 minute as defined doesn't exist. It is an agreement. You understand? Yeah, time passes, but time is not measured per se, right? Because even, if you're in summer, you will have more daylight, right? If you're in winter, you will have less daylight. So it would be normal, for example, for you to consider the days are shorter. And usually you hear this, right? But in the abstraction, it's 24 hours nonetheless, right? 12 hours and 12 hours, right? There's no adjustment to the measurement. Why? Because the abstraction becomes the main thing. The abstraction becomes the world, right? So the perception rules the organic and the way you interact with it. Right. So I don't know if I was a bit confusing in explaining that, but I think it's a point that needs to be brought up. The fact that the abstraction becomes a replacement for the actual interaction.
Well, it's the same idea that you see even with, consciousness itself, right? It's all representational. In fact, everything, and this, of course, occurs cyclically and even microcosmically with societies, as they tend to grow and age, if you will, from the maiden to the wife, and to, of course, the old crone. They become more fixated, and in fact, we'll get to this in iPetCode too. It becomes more fixated on what we would call abstractionism, or like what you just stated there. It becomes fixated on the representational qualities of the thing. So it doesn't necessarily understand that there's a distinction between utilizing these, like what you were mentioning with time, utilizing these things in the mundane world, which can be utilized as tools, or, of course, having these things almost consume us entirely, and these things almost making us into instruments for its own manifestation, right? This is all, of course, what you even see with the likes of the retrocausal silicon god, right? This notion that you see with the techne or the dark enlightenment. Ultimately, these representations almost come to utilize us to manifest them, to project them into reality.
Yes, and what it does, things like AI and that sort of thing. What it does is that, because even if we were to consider, which, as you know, I don't, that AI is actual intelligence, it isn't. It is merely programmed and can only do what is programmed to do. Very complex, sure, but nonetheless a programmed program, let's say. But even if we were to consider that AI is actual intelligence, the only perception AI has is of abstraction. AI has no direct contact with reality itself, right? So when you ask a question to AI, let's say, right, what it can do is access a database that was put there of information to collect the answer, and formulate the answer that you were looking for, right? But that database is a concept, right? That database is not experience, is not knowledge, right? Because if you put a database of gibberish, it will give you a gibberish answer, period, right? It can't formulate a coherent response if the database is not coherent itself, right? And that database is secondhand, because it wasn't that quote unquote intelligence that experienced it, right? So if you ask me a question that I have, self-awareness enough to distinguish my mind character from my ego and etc., and I can revisit my experiences and so on. If you ask me a question, I will answer you with experience, be it internal or external through interaction, right? AI cannot do that. It can only access a database that was put there by someone else that probably, was merely a collection of desired information, let's say, and come up with an answer through that. You see, so it's the ultimate elevation of the abstraction as a replacement for the world. So it becomes a virtual reality without, being hooked up, that image of being hooked up to a computer or, whatever that was, made with the Matrix and movies of that kind. It doesn't need that, because as soon as you ask AI a question, and again, it's a tool, I'm not against it, you have to understand and be aware that its answer is going to come from a database that was not experienced or known. It was simply put there, right? Same as if, you want to see, you have a library of books, you put them all into a database for in a computer system, and you ask, okay, search for these keywords, right? If that keyword is there, it will find the matches. If that keyword isn't there, it won't find. But none of it means that those books were, you understand, actually experienced by that intelligence, which isn't intelligent, like I said. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
No, absolutely. Therefore, it doesn't draw any meaning from it. This is also the issue you find with late stage empires, which I identified in my first book, which is, to be very, very simplistic about it, late stage empires typically care about, firstly, they care about mass, which is for them a sort of outgrowth of their efficiency and administration bureaucracy. But what ultimately it's similar to AI, right? In fact, I mean, similar to AI, I mean, the parallels are pretty stark, which is that what you find is the barbarians, the upstarts on the hinterland who eventually destroy the empire from within, who don't have as much efficiency or mass, but what they do have is resilience, and they have the ability to sort of carve out a meaning, right? And when people say, I've heard this constantly, even I myself, of course, hold embers of this idea, which is that we feel like the magic is gone in modern society, because ultimately it is. This magic is sort of the divine feminine, that great quintessence of energy, which provided us the impetus to establish, of course, our societies, our civilizations, that keeps us going on. So you find in late stage civilizations, they're more efficient. But that efficiency in and of itself is almost like it's a self-ruination. They're treading the path of self-ruination because fundamentally they're not living that experience. They're not drawing meaning from the knowledge. They're simply just regurgitating and regurgitating in a sort of empire of spectacle.
And Silas, they're only efficient because they have set up an agreement world where it's the only place where they can be efficient, right?
Exactly.
We were talking about chess, right? You can, program a computer to play chess and even beat a chess master, which has happened apparently in the past, right? But that only happens because it's a closed system. It's a completely closed system made up of an agreement of rules, of possible moves, which can be calculated. And therefore, it becomes efficient, right? Life isn't like that. Life has the unexpected. In my book, I actually used chess as an example in a passage there. I'm sure you remember.
Yeah.
But I say that it's the abandoned mind character's favorite game, because everything is predictable in chess, right? If you miss a move, it's because you didn't calculate it enough.
Yeah.
But it's always present there. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is, there's no new piece out of the blue that appears in the board, right? There are rules for everything, right? And so to deal with the unexpected is to be alive. And this is what these systems evade by creating this surrogate abstraction imposed upon a world, which I call worldview, that becomes a virtual reality. And that's the only place and the only setup where it can be efficient.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. Oh no, you're absolutely spot on. And this actually reminds me that Bobby Fischer, I think it was Bobby Fischer that leveled this critique at chess, and he said, ultimately there's no intelligence to gaining a mastery over chess. He said, because intelligence to himself, I believe he stated this, it indicates an ability to deal with the unquantifiable variables. But ultimately, chess, to become a master at it, all you have to do is to memorize effectively all
Absolutely.
of the possible systems of play and the ability to react to your opponent. So every move that your opponent will have, every system that your opponent will you know impose against you, that itself has its own system of defense. So ultimately, to go outside of those prescribed systems would mean that you're going to constantly you will lose, because ultimately there are only so many moves that you can make. There's only so many counters that you can bring to bear against your opponent based upon his moves. So ultimately, he says, in the end, it's just a regurgitation of memorized moves. And he says there is no there's what did he say? It's something along the lines, effectively, there is no creativity that can be incurred in chess because of that.
Yes, and he came up with a practice which was Fischer random, that people who are familiar with chess probably know, which is basically you set up the board with the pieces in random positions, right? So the rook or the knight or the bishop or the king or the queen go in random positions behind the pawns, and then you play like that, right? And this was a game that he came up with as a practice, but that tried exactly to bring some unexpectedness to chess, which of course, if you try all the variations and you're able to calculate, it brings just the same game with with different calculations, right? But that was his, and I understand entirely and agree entirely with what you said about him in that regard. And he, as a chess player, whether he was a character in the narrative or not, he brought up that point, and Fischer random, if you look it up, it's his name followed by random, is an interesting attempt to exactly bring about that unexpectedness.
And this is also what we've brought up, me and Eros, in discussions, which is that the reason Sauron was defeated, and this idea of the One Ring, this idea, of course, of this spirit, or this will, almost, this unrelenting will to dominate all life, that it itself was defeated because ultimately, within its purely efficient algorithm of thinking and of planning, it couldn't plan for the unquantifiable variable that one would act within a spirit of self-sacrifice. So it was beyond. It was, please.
But the desire to dominate, as the single impulse, which is basically what Sauron represents. Sauron, and preceded by Morgoth, in that literary works, that represents exactly the avoidance of the unexpected, first of all. Secondly, because to dominate is to prevent any unexpectedness, right? You want everything to become predictable, right? So no unpredictable elements come in, right? That is the first thing. The second thing that needs to be said, and that I left in a comment, if you recall, is that even in the mythos, in the Tolkien mythos, Erwin was the first one to show a desire to dominate. Because if he hadn't had the desire to dominate, he wouldn't have been disturbed by Melkor's, which later became Morgoth, dissonance when he was singing. And I don't know if you already had any possibility to go through the books, especially the Silmarillion, where this scene, I think, is in there. This is evident, you see. So
yes.
what is trying to be said there is that the potential you know, people treat it's either one or the other, right? Either you're completely in the organic reality or you're completely in the abstraction. But the abstraction has a healthy place, and it's the balance between the two, right? You need some unexpectedness, but you also need some predictability in the sense of, make things work, to, as humans, live our lives, appropriately, let's say comfortably, if you want to put it that way. And the thing here is that the potential for both is in the beginning of it all, right? In the creator, whatever you want to call it, right? When one separates from the other and sees the other as opponent, that is when the problem begins. Because then you either live in a world of chaos where everything is unpredictable, or you live in a world of every little thing is predicted, right? And neither of these are healthy, correct? So, as you see, the problem is not the other side of the coin. The problem is that the two sides were separated and seen as opponents of each other. Again, we go into the binaries, right? So if you treat a part of you as an opponent, there you have your demiurge, right? There you have your archons, or whatever now in this Gnostic terminology. You have your demons or your angels, right? But that is only because they were separated. And integration is exactly the opposite. It's to find the healthy place of balance between the two, because we are complete whole beings and not a separation of light and shadow like we see now in the checkered board there, right? Oh, white squares and black squares, and white pieces and black pieces in opposition, in conflict. Chess is a game of conflict, right? No, 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 it's balance. It's white pieces, black pieces together. That is the balance of the life with capital L, let's say.
And
Sorry
it's
for the rant.
funny. No, no, I totally agree. It's also something you see in the Nahuatl, and I believe the Mayans had a similar ball game, and so did the northern Chichimek tribes and such, which is that it wasn't necessarily a game about opposition, but it was a game about keeping the ball up, right? Keeping this sort of keeping the game in play, right? It was about balance. Of course, you were scoring goals against the other team, so there was a competition there on some level, but the competition itself wasn't the be all and end all of the game. It was to maintain the flight of the ball. And so again, it's this sort of energy flow, and this is something you actually see with the positioning of that thousand-petaled lotus, if you will, either indicative of the Sahasrara, the crown chakra, or of course the chakras even above that, which have placeholder colors such as the rose. Rose is one of those placeholder colors, right? Hence the Rosicrucian, or the rosy cross. So the idea is that it's contained between the two, and hence why you see as well the Australian crown coin underneath the foot of Obama, right? It's the crown is the asymptote. It's always in this sort of perpetual shadowed or sequestered state, because to maintain the chess game, even with the periodic enlightenment or reset, which itself is a sort of false enlightenment, a false. People have been stating in the comments as well. And the thing that you see in IPEC Go 2 is ego death. I don't think that's the
No.
case. It's perhaps you have
Nor
a
should
false,
it be. Nor should
no,
it be. Yeah.
but they may be relating to the idea that it's a false ego death,
Mm.
So, but this is the thing with the chess game. We get bound up in the constricting magnetic sort of currents, right? Again, like the caduceus or the or the Birkeland currents, or the the similar ideas surrounding that, right? The entwined serpents. That itself is the same, is really what you're seeing here, which is even in the periodic resets, this game of chess still maintains itself by keeping the crown, keeping the spirit, keeping the source of the true nature of man sequestered or hidden from man himself, right? So even this lotus itself is almost like a false lotus. It's not necessarily, again, it's betwixt the two, the light and the dark, but it's still within the game itself,
Yeah.
So
Yes,
so
and
that's
I would, sorry.
No, I was finished, please.
I would just say about the ego death, I would, advise people to really consider what ego death means. It means death of me, death of the I, right? Death of the individual, right? And I know that there's this, promoted idea that, oh, we're one with everything. Yeah, if we were one with everything, we wouldn't be born with separation. In the sense that, I am here and you are there and we're communicating, but you have your life and I have mine, right? And when I say life, I'm not talking about mundane life. I'm talking about life within. You have your own quote unquote universe within. I have my own quote unquote universe, right? And it is supposed to be that way. So ego death, even in the spiritual elevated sense that usually is depicted, is BS, in my opinion. It is exactly the opposite. It's integration, because ego is a key function, and I think it has been placed incorrectly as the mind character. As you know, I've wrote about it extensively. And it is the exact key point that interacts and makes us be alive here in this world, right? It is not the originator of life, but it is what makes us be and act alive in this world. So even if it is a fake ego death or a true ego death, there's no ego death. It shouldn't have an ego death. If you were to kill the ego, you would die entirely. We're not talking about, oh, you elevate and you go to the fifth dimension with the purple light and the rainbows and the prisms and the flowers. No, you die in perhaps a worse death than the biological one, right? And when people just look at all the ideologies, all the ideologies are collectivist, therefore demanding an ego death or an ego muffling, whichever way you want to put it, right? So if you are, I don't know, a liberal, right, you are collectively a liberal. You are not yourself, right? You share a certain amount of beliefs and worldview and so on and so forth with everyone else. Same if you're a rightist, doesn't matter, conservative or whatever you want to call it, or whichever way whichever binary you want to put it, right? All the ideologies necessarily have to be collectivist, right? And again, collectivism also has a healthy place, but within balance. The problem is that the abstraction, again, I reinforce, became the main thing over the actual organic world, trying to defeat it even. You know that part of the book where I say that, the organic world is always in opposition with the worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Man is always placed either as an invader or as the regulator, never as a part, an integral part, a healthy part, right? And this is what must change in terms of in the memory rooms, in terms of background beliefs, if you know what I'm saying, right? But well, anyway, sorry for the rant, and I think we've spent almost an hour on
Oh, we have, yeah.
this.
I
So
mean, we'll need to move. We'll need to move. But yeah, just to sort of back up just really quickly with what you were saying there. I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, one analogy I can make, just if I may quickly, is that the ego is like the ship. And what people are saying is, I want to fling myself overboard into the rivers of the Eridanus, the amassing currents, which will drive me, of course, as a castaway, um, this way or that. Without the ego, fundamentally, you are susceptible to all of this. You're susceptible to all of the snares of the currents, be them ideological or what have you, right? So, and the ideology itself, once you go through this ego death, this is why, by the way, dehumanization is the primary modus operandi of all cults or ideologies, because they want to break you down. They want to fling you from the ship of your natural ego, which is the good ego, and they want to basically put you in the current, put you in hell first for a sort of temporary period of time. And once you're, totally tortured and tormented in this current without a ship, without an ego, then the ideology provides you a raft, which is
a
this
surrogate.
Sort of
Yes, a surrogate ego, an externalized ego, exactly, which is a shadow projection of the rejection of the first one. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so Bin Laden, right?
Yeah, Bin Laden. We got there eventually, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just play it and just tell me when you want to stop, and we'll look over that and analyze it.
Yeah. Can you go back a little bit? Well, I think we have already mentioned that Bin Laden had in his beard an inverted flame, so he would be, in the same way as the. I think it's the devil card that has a torch pointing down, isn't it? In the
Yes.
tarot, yes.
Yes.
Which would be the destructive fire, but in the background you see the crescent, which is the growing crescent. So it's called waxing, I think, right?
Yeah.
Which means that the new moon, so the darkness has already passed. So this is the symbolic, and I'm talking narrative, destruction by fire that brings about the rebirth after the darkness. But also in the next scene, of course, we have something that we've been talking about as well, which is that the Statue of Liberty, a bit ahead, the Statue of Liberty is, of course, surrounded by a very well-known symbol and very prominent in the news, right? So, and that is what brings about the destruction of the US. Of course, the Statue of Liberty is perhaps the most well-known symbol for the United States. The other star that is at its base is a very well-known symbol for Israel. And so one brings the destruction of the other. And like we've been stating, or at least I have been postulating, I think that that will be the cause, or that will be the promoter of the scapegoat scenario, because eventually, after all this process, people want an escape valve. Right. They want to, because of all the pressure, like you said, people are put in a quote unquote hell, and there has to be a release of all that pressure, right? And the best release that has always been found is to, find the culprit, present the culprit to justice, do, public trial or, punishment. And then people can join together again and move forward. There was that guy, it was Bumble, that sent me. I disagree with most of his views, but he was very on point with the part of sacrifice. I'm talking about René Giraud. I don't know if you're familiar,
No.
but he presented a case for the sacrifice as a collective thing that eases the pressure, and therefore, after a sacrifice is done, and this sacrifice can be of a guilty party, a culprit, etc., or someone that is, scapegoated as a culprit, eases up and allows people to unify again as a society. That is the most, in my opinion, interesting point of his theory. Then he goes into the function of Christianity and etc. And he goes into other things that I don't agree with at all. But he has a point there. And that is what I think this means. So Israel brings down the US by its influence. And I mean, even mainstream is talking about it. So it is absolutely within the narrative. And I think that will be the culprit. And like we've talked before, of course, one goes with the other, right? If Israel is found guilty, the US has to, by inference, be found guilty as well, right? So there will be that scapegoat, and after the scapegoat, the new world can emerge, and people will gladly, the evil has been eradicated, and all the pressure eased, and finally we can be free, which of course you aren't. But this is my first comment about this scene.
Absolutely, as well. Another thing to mention is that you find with Orion and also Abraxas, interestingly, the Statue of Liberty almost evokes this, of course, in a more distinct way, arguably, which is that in the left hand will always be either a pelt, or of course with Abraxas it's a shield. Sometimes with Orion it's also indicated as a shield as well. And then on the right hand, which is raised, I believe, which is that, I think it's Beetlejuice, and there's another star up there anyway. But the idea is that is either the flame, with Abraxas it's the whip. It can also be the club with Orion, or of course the bow as well. But you see with of course the Statue of Liberty, she is a Libertas, which I had to look up here. It's in my notes somewhere, but it's also related to the Greek. So that's Libertas is the Latin or Roman goddess of freedom and the personification of liberty. It's also directly related to the Greek equivalent of the goddess of freedom, Eleutheria. But interestingly, those both have roots in the goddess Artemis. And we've just recently seen Artemis 2. And of course, Artemis 2 is the project name. The shuttle is actually called Orion. So you're seeing this same connection here. But the idea is, and I believe it happens at an earlier scene as well. I think we've went over this. I don't quite recall now, but with the sort of breaking of that, as we'll see here. Here we go. So the breaking of that torch. Firstly, I mean, it can be seen as two things. Firstly, the clouds of destruction, of Negredo, of putrefaction are taking root. Whatever has occurred, whatever cataclysm has occurred, the sort of effects of that are beginning to take root. And so fundamentally, the light of liberty is gone, but in the sort of book of the law is still there. So the idea I think they're evoking there is that Libertas, the divine feminine, in a sense, she has lost that sort of white light principle of her, the positive principle of liberty, of law itself, law and order. And all it has left is the code, is the bureaucratic law book. So fundamentally, the US will take on this more, perhaps you could say, transparently tyrannical sort of personification, which it's doing, by the way. I mean, interestingly, you're seeing in the narrative that, well, for example, a prime example of this is Donald Trump stating just recently there that an entire civilization will die tonight. So basically, just outrightly stating the Americans and the American civilization and the West in general as well, they will utilize, let's not say the G word, but war crimes, extremely heinous war crimes, the destruction of an entire people to bring about their objectives, which of course is no different than the thing that they defeated previously in World War II, supposedly. So that which brought about their sort of hegemonic control with the Bretton Woods Agreement and so on and so forth, and the petrodollar and all of this. So I think that's another thing that we can mention. But you also notice as well here that I'll just let it play a little bit. You'll notice that the hexagram, which is of course the Magen David, the Star of David, firstly, it's not actually traditionally a Jewish symbol. It's traditionally a Kabbalistic symbol, but Kabbalah and Judaism weren't always as entwined as they are now. There was always a sort of bit of animosity between the two until around about the 16th or 17th century. At least the mass adoption of Lurianic Kabbalah and Sabbatai Zvi, and of course Jacob Frank later on as well. But you'll notice that it's underneath the water. So it's almost akin to, of course, the shark that we saw previously, the sort of predator, but it's also an abyssal force. It's a hidden cryptic force. It's a force that almost brings about the destruction of the icy order. It is a force of the primordial abyss, of decay itself.
Yeah, but in the let's say political narrative sense, it's because the U.S. is the visible part and Israel is the invisible part. So the part behind the scenes, let's say, right? So if the U.S. is the tip of the iceberg, the rest of the iceberg is Israel. This is, I think, the representation there. By the way, I just want to make a correction. It's René Girard, not Giraud. That I said
yes,
before.
Yeah. Right, René Girard, yes.
Girard, yes. So I think that it would be that. And when you were talking about the book Remaining, of course, as we've talked previously, bureaucracy is the when the paranoia sits in, and I'm talking about narratives, but the people will become paranoid, and the state officials will become paranoid. Those that are within, treating this perception as reality itself will become paranoid, and bureaucracy grows as a result of that paranoia. And it is one of the stages, I think, one of the dire stages of any process that has reached its expiry date, right? So it can't. From that point on, it can only be renewed afresh from that, scapegoating, sacrifice kind of thing onto a new facade. So, I completely agree that it will involve a lot of bureaucracy, legalism, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And you also see this as well with the Artemis 2. There's this clear celebratory atmosphere surrounding that project, but you also see on the shuttle these posters for 250 years, which of course it'll be in July 4th, which of course the Statue of Liberty carries on her book, etched into it, July 4th, 1776, which is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Funnily enough as well, I believe it's that year was also the founding of, I forget what date it was now, but it was the founding of the the Bavarian Illuminati, which was also known previously as the Perfectibilists. Really, they're just an offshoot, a branch of Kabbalism, ultimately, but there's not really much to say regarding them, funnily enough. But you'll notice as well this tied, of course. Well, of course, I mean, as I stated in my first book, though I incorrectly stated that it was a natural cycle. In fact, look, the more I've learned, it actually isn't a natural cycle. But typically, empires last for 250 years. Now, the reason for that is it's actually tied to mathematical, financial, and the economic realities of the fiat currency system, right? And this tells you that all of these empires are actually produced, and they're brought about artificially through fiat currency, through a fiat system. And of course, all of these empires are fundamentally host empires, including the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire. I mean, we could go on, the American Empire, of course, as well. And these are promoted by a more fluid, maneuverable, hidden empire, which of course produces the fiat currency system and maintains these host empires to exact tribute, of course, from the conquered territories and to expand by proxy through the host empire its sphere of influence and control. So that, of course, its world script, its blueprint, its worldview itself, the rules of its own game can come to encompass the entire reality itself, right? And another connection to make is that you see that the light is actually on the same side as this sort of dog-like creature, which is an island. Now, the islands we'll get to later on. You'll see islands constantly throughout this film. There's a connection to that, but we'll probably flesh that out in later scenes. But you'll notice the dog, which is Sirius. It's the sun behind the sun, the sort of esoteric sun, that which is the sort of point without a place, a circle without a circumference, the human soul, essentially, the unquantifiable variable. You'll notice that it itself almost lies strewn and dead, like a corpse upon a battlefield, within the icy remains. And you'll notice its eye is white. This evokes almost the eyes of Kali, almost as well, the votive offering statues or idols of the Sumerian peoples and Akkadian peoples that you see. And it's almost in a similar way, I think it's evoking this idea that you see at the moment of fear or death, or the terror of death. The eyes widen, the pupils widen, and what that does is it allows in more light, so that of course you're hyper aware, of course, right? It's a sort of defense mechanism, so you can you elevate your sort of eyesight, your vision, so you can evade the predator. I think it's evoking that as well. The light is also connected to that, the human soul, so that is gone. And you'll also notice the shadows as well, right at the bottom of the female of the statue. This also evokes the Piscean or serpent-like legs and feet of Abraxas. And what this is indicating is effectively the Piscean constellation, which in and of itself, symbolically, you see one fish. Well, firstly, both fish, their tails are tied together, and vis-a-vis a knot. But one fish goes up and the other fish goes. So one fish goes vertical and the other fish goes horizontal. So it creates that right angle that we were talking about previously. And by them pulling in opposite directions, actually ties the knot even further. So it's almost like a Chinese finger trap. And this is what you see with, again, their worldview, their system itself. You have the dissidents or the alternative that pull in one direction, attempting to escape. And of course, the normies or the general masses pull in another direction. But they almost balance each other out after, a given portion or duration of time. And this perpetuates the system itself. It almost creates an artificial balancing of the system, at least temporarily. So I think that's what's being evoked there too. It's also a symbol of chaos as well.
One thing there, because I've had this intuition here and I looked it up. I don't know if you would agree, but wouldn't that figure that you call a dog be somewhat a stylized representation of Manhattan? If you look at the shape of Manhattan.
Yeah. If it was flipped the other way around, is that what you mean?
Yeah, just put up. Can you put up Google Maps or
Yeah.
something showing Manhattan? Just the shape. Um, not saying it is, but it just seems stylistically similar. It has that bifurcation there, which would be the top part.
If I can.
Sorry for the interruption. If you can put it on screen, we'll all
Yeah.
figure it out together.
Oh God, hold on. It's saved it as a WebP file. Hold on. I'll need to find a JPEG. Technical difficulties, guys. Here, no, God, that's a GIF image. Right, hold on. I'll take a screenshot of it, and then I'll just save it as a JPEG. Oh
Sorry,
my
everyone.
God. Just bear with me. Momentary disruption. Here we go. So it is quite similar, isn't it?
Yeah, although inverted. Because I think there's a bifurcation in Manhattan that isn't shown there. Because if you look at Google Maps, for example, and I'm looking here. Oh, okay. It's not Manhattan. It's Long Island. I'm sorry. That's why you
Right.
didn't. Yeah, it's Long Island, which is well, almost next to it. I was meaning Long Island, not Manhattan. I'm sorry. My bad.
So Long Island is. Let me just share the Google Maps screen. I'll actually just take an image of it.
Sorry for this, everyone. It's my bad. My bad.
But almost that's evoking the financial center as well,
Hmm.
in a sense, which is the heart of the empire, effectively. Well, always is, isn't it?
Hmm.
So there's Long Island. You
Exactly. So
can see,
there's
yeah.
that bifurcation there on the right side, which would seem similar to that bifurcation there. I don't know. It just looked. It popped in my head, and it looked similar. Of course, stylistically, not necessarily an exact match, but
No, absolutely, and it's similar as well to what you see with the that bifurcation right at the end of either between Stamford, Bridgeport, New Haven, and of course Long Island, or even the right at the tip of Long Island, you see that bifurcation as well, which could evoke that sort of mouth type
yeah.
effect that you see there. Yeah, and an interesting spot there, an interesting spot.
Hmm.
There,
Because
yeah.
it would be relevant, right, to have like you said, the financial center or the economical center linked with the toppling of the U.S., right? Which is what this scene represents, in my opinion, right? in the narrative.
Absolutely. And as well, you notice that I've always found this strange. I don't know if it's if anyone has any knowledge on, I mean deep knowledge on that of Semitic languages like Arabic and their scripts. Perhaps not Hebrew, but Arabic, or perhaps Farsi as well. All of those sort of cursive Semitic scripts. I've noticed that right in the center, you notice that very. I don't know if you can see my cursor. You notice this dot here, this very strange, almost looks like a humanoid figure, and then you've got this dash here. I'm not quite sure what that's evoking. I don't know if it's Morse code as well, or of course it's perhaps an Arabic letter too. I think there's a connection we can draw there as well, or it may be presenting a connection, but it eludes me right now. There's certain, but I think the gist, like what you've provided, is that it's this what we're seeing currently in the news regarding Israel, regarding that of the US as well, right? The US is a puppet of Israel, and that has become part of the normative sort of understanding of
Even mainstream.
geopolitics.
Yes,
Oh yeah,
even
totally.
mainstream. Yeah. Okay, continue.
I just want to point out as well, you'll notice that when that falls, I'll see if I can, you'll notice that it's almost like the 17th tarot card, the Omega pool, and you'll notice there's a ripple from the center, almost like the Simsum, a contraction from the center that establishes a compartmentalized ripple outwards. And this is, of course, similar to the cosmogony and Kabbalah. It's most creation myths have this idea, this notion of the frequency, similar, of course, to Tolkien's the choir of the Ainur and the singing that brings about the emergence of the world. I'll put this down to slower speed. You'll notice it. You'll see here, yeah. So from that center, so it's almost in a way it's akin to this idea of, firstly, the conspiracy itself, which is almost an artificial representation of this within the compartmentalization of it. It's known as a holarchy as opposed to a hierarchy. So compartmentalized layers outwards from an inner sanctum or center. But this itself is an artificial mirroring of potentially the creation of the world itself through the birth pangs of the contraction of the Simsum. Simsum itself means contraction in Hebrew. So we see that too. And you notice throughout every period, there are birth pangs within those renewals or resets. And you even see this in Kabbalah before the Messiah will come. They talk about the birth pangs of the Messiah. So all of it's linked to a sort of an artificial mimicry. All of it's mimesis, right? It's a mimicry of the natural world.
Yes. And here
if
it
there's
is.
Anything you want to mention
Yeah,
on that one?
that is the development of the new god, of the AI, let's say, being done and overseen by the all-seeing eye, reptilian eye, and being gestated with the information. And I think that is the let's say baby stage of the Christ figure that we see later on. And he's being gestated in an egg, of course, symbolically, by this snake eye kind of thing. And as you can see, Ordo Apkeo written there. So it is their little project, right? AI is their little project, which it would be to replace God. So it is, of course, we've several times heard about how they want to replace God and so on and become God themselves and etc. But of course, this is all narrative and it's all symbolic in the sense, right? And so the way that they would find to replace God is to create a God in a world that is so programmed that it looks like God, it resembles God, right? It can't go outside those boundaries in the same way that, a chess piece can't go outside the board. So I think this is the gestation of that AI God that we'll see in the emerging as Christ, let's say, as that supposed Christ.
Yes, and well, this also relates as well to the Orphic egg or the world egg, and
Yes.
this notion of the shell being similar to Leviathan. You see this on the World Tarot card, right? The wreath of the torturous one. Interestingly, it's found within the backmasking, I believe it's called, of the Stairway to Heaven. So if you people have always wondered, what does Satan? I think it talks about, Satan's tool shed, and
Yes.
we are tortured within it. Interestingly, that actually sort of has a sort of correlation. That this is the reverse of the Stairway to Heaven, right? The Stairway to Heaven, in their mind, is evoked from ab chao, which is Latin for out of chaos. So out of chaos is what's known as the Phanes Protogenos, the shining firstborn, emerges, and it emerges cycle after cycle in their view. So the idea is, as we see with the four tendrils of the snake wrapped around this, that it's almost trying to crush this embryo, this Phanes Protogenos. But it's not necessarily seeking to crush it. It merely is applying pressure through the four elements, if you will, in this sense, through the stability of the square, of the world, of the material world, of even the system itself, so that it can, of course, bring about this dark child, right? This out of chaos, this order out of chaos. And so it will either crush the child, or it will pressurize it again like a diamond, and it will bring about that new start, that restart to the next cycle. You'll notice as well that the tail is almost creating a 6 or a 9. This is something we're going to see. We're going to see evoked throughout and represented, conveyed rather, throughout the rest of the scenes with this strange sort of reptilian demiurgos, who again isn't there physically, but he's there through the media. So he's there in abstraction, or he's there as a plasma entity, if you wanted to think of it along that lines. But he's there as a representational figure, not necessarily as a real figure. So what you're finding there is that the 6 and the 9 relates to Karkinos, or the crab, and that zodiacal image, that zodiacal sign rather, it was known to the Babylonians as the gateway to the underworld. So what we're seeing here is almost the descent into that chaos, so that we can be reborn from the crucible of it. This is being evoked here. You'll also notice as well that the stem, this sort of birth stem, and the top is the egg. It's almost indicative of the semen, of the ejaculate, or of the phallus itself. So this is a sort of this is the transgressiveness of the cycle, that's similar to the Libertas, or the Statue of Liberty, that the divine feminine has almost been crystallized entirely. The divine feminine being this limitlessness, this unquantifiable variable, that they're attempting to quantify it, to measure the immeasurable, to wrap it around in an icy embrace, so that they may control it. And of course, they never do. They're never going to control it. It'll always break free from the bounds of its of the prison. You'll also notice as well the reptilian eye.
Yes.
again, that emerges from Draco, which Eros, interestingly, I didn't know this, but Eros mentioned that it comes from an old archaic verb in Greek, drakon, which means to watch. So it's this idea of the ayin as well, right? The ayin pictographically in the Hebrew lettering system is that of the eye. So and of course, this is why you see it on the capstone, on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States, the Ordo Ab Chao, the Annuit Coeptis Novus Ordo Seclorum, or he who favors our undertaking, the new order of the ages. So the idea is with that is in Kabbalah, the Ayin is the primordial God. It is the true God. It's the force that dictates all of the cycles of time, and it's the nothingness, if you will, or the no thingness. It has no being. It's beyond the bounds of the alpha and the omega, but it's the orchestration of those bounds itself. And so, effectively, what they're attempting to do is what we've been stating is mimic that, but the idea is within the Zohar, between each period of time or cycle, that there is a liminal space, a transitional space between the two, between each cycle rather, and that is where the nigredo or putrefaction occurs, and they call this in the Zohar and Kabbalah the passing through the ayin. So you pass through the eye, you pass through the pupil of the eye, which is the orphan, and you almost become renewed, both in abulia, which is the loss of will, amnesia, which is the loss of who you are, and then, of course, that of apathy, which is the loss of the care of your own survival. So these three things are the trinity which maintain the chess game, which maintain the worldview cycle after cycle, and these are the things they're mimicking, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. So moving.
Oh, something else just to quickly mention. You'll notice too, it's actually the left hand that holds this egg. So the left hand, is it the left hand? No, sorry, it's the right hand.
It's the right hand.
So it's that of the masculine. It's that of chesed. It's that of yakin, which is to establish, quite literally in Hebrew. So you'll see the dichotomy here, right? The right and of course the left of the drakon, right? So similar to the lotus, that is the invisible, I forget the Sanskrit for it, but it's the invisible column, the third column. And that, of course, is betwixt the right and the left. So the left of the reptilian eye and the right of chesed, which is the establishment. It's the mercy, the thing that gives order to the Ab Chao, you know?
Yep.
So you have, well, we'll let it play a bit, then we'll make a comment.
The TV demon. So this is media. In my opinion, it's the TV demon scaring the ones asleep, quote unquote, who live in this alternative universe where all these terrorist things and horrific things are happening, right? And there's even a sequence later on that shows like market plunge and that kind of thing. So they live in an economic world, a world of wars, a world of all these horrific things, but basically it's they're not seeing the world, they're experiencing a virtual reality through this TV demon, quote unquote, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And you'll also notice as well that underneath its eyes is Ordo Ab Chao, but you'll notice that so that right eye, of course our left, but it's right, the right eye is that of it's blinded. So you actually, I believe you see this in the Al-Masih al-Dajjal, So the idea that the right eye is blinded, that is the spiritual eye. This goes back to the eye of Horus and the eye of Ra. And so,
Odin.
and Odin as well, yeah, absolutely, hanging upon Yggdrasil, sacrificing himself almost. And so the left eye is that of materiality. That is the one that remains. So the order is gone. The natural order is gone. And what you have in its place is this sort of material abchaos. So out of chaos, out of sort of material, out of the material or mass consumption of the modern world of these various civilizations and the model of civilization itself, is born this ever watchful, ever, I guess you could say, avaricious and perfidious entity that seeks to maintain itself and perpetuate itself. This worldview, essentially. You'll notice too, as well, the pyramid is upside down. Whenever you see that sort of upside down pyramid, you see it with the hexagram, right? It is the sort of inverted feminine. It's the womb itself, which is similar to the Platonic cave, as we were saying several discussions ago. And what you're doing ritualistically is you're drawing down that what would be contained within the seat of the mind, the soul. You're drawing down the soul into this world of pure illusion, right? Pure worldviews. All of this. You'll notice too as well that it's all silver and black. So the black is of course nigredo or putrefactio, but you'll notice the silver is relating to the moon, and the moon is the regulator of the mundane cosmologically. Of course, Saturn, which is a mirror, its orbital period is ostensibly 29.5 years approximately. The orbital period of the moon is that of 29.5 days. So basically, one is the regulator of the mundane, the moon, one is the regulator of the heavens, that of Saturn. And in classical astronomy, it was the last planet, the patient one. So it's a mixture of the two, the black of Saturn, the silver of the moon. This also goes to Kabbalah and what it states regarding the moon.
It also has the gold in the earring and the teeth. But I would say that the black is nigredo, followed by albedo, which would be the silver, and followed by citrinitas, which would be, or citrinas, or something like that, which would be the gold. And of course, as you said, it relates, yes, to albedo, the moon, and citrinitas with the sun, being that the moon is the emotional. So, of course, nigredo with emotion, but also bringing, because citrinitas would be the mind, bringing the mind into that vortex of fear and despair and complete abject condition, right, that you find this character in. I mean, he's completely terrified. He can't even operate. He's just curled in a almost, I don't know if it's really fetal position or something like that, but he's completely overwhelmed by everything this demon has been conveying, right? And so that represents exactly the reason why one shouldn't get involved in the narrative, and the reason why we should look at the narrative with objective, a more objective eye, and find the flaws, the indicators, the narrative points, the patterns that show that this is a performance, right? Because when that happens, I mean, if you're watching a movie, you know it's a movie, you know it's fiction, right? And even so, you can get sucked in and get involved in the movie, right? And even get upset, cry, get angry at the movie that you're watching, right? Now imagine with the news, if you think it is true, right? So this is the warning, in my opinion, of the distance that we require to objectively look at the performance. Sure, there are consequences, because if enough people, and they do, treated as real, there are consequences in our interactions with others and with society in general, but that doesn't need to, gain a root in our own psyche. And that's the only place where we can and are already free, regardless, right?
Absolutely, and this also relates to Rubeda, which is the reddening or the red dawn, and that comes from the yoke of the sun. And you see this with I forget this character's name now, but you see this with let's just call him Egghead, right? So, the what you're seeing is that all of the three mutable mutable stages of the magnum opus, or mutable elements, fire, air, water, that which is contained within this demiurgos character, that is almost feeding upon artificially that of the rubeda, the yoke of the sun, right? To maintain itself. You actually, funnily enough, see this with the moon, and this is sort of fed. This is, pardon me, infiltrated even the heliocentric model, right? Whether it's right or wrong. You see, for example, it states in Sukkah 29a, verses 6 to 9. This is a tractate from the Talmud, I believe. Quote, "Our rabbis taught when the sun is in eclipse, it is a bad omen for the whole world." This goes back to the Bin Laden thing of the blood moon tetrad as well. When the sun is in an eclipse, it is a bad omen for idolaters. When the moon is in eclipse, it is a bad omen for Israel, since Israel reckons by the moon and idolaters by the sun. If during an eclipse the visage of the sun is red like blood, it is an omen that sword, i.e., war, is coming to the world. This is what you see back with the Bin Laden thing. If the sun is black like sackcloth, made of dark goat hair, it is an omen that arrows of hunger are coming. And then we read as well in Zohar Parshat Vayechi, Zohar Volume 1, Folio 238a, often cited in Hasidic texts like Lechutai Moharan. Quote, "For the moon has no light of her own, only that which she receives from the sun. And this corresponds to Malkuth. This is the material world. It has nothing of its own other than what it receives." So the idea is that what you're seeing with the demiurgos, that it is almost similar to the moon, right? It's simply reflecting what it's seen from the sun, or of course it has no life of its own. It's sort of feeding upon it, and it also as well, the golden hoop is this idea of the materiality of this solar circle, right? Of the entirety of the cycle. But of course, it can, like what you see of the lobe here, it can never fully conjoin the cycle itself. It's always in this imperfect state. In essence, it can never be like the sun. It can never be like the soul. It can never be purely perfect, like this unquantifiable variable that it's seeking to feed from. It will always and forever be a sort of imperfect mime of that. And so, yeah, this one ring to rule them all, if you will, that too. So that's evoked there as well. You'll notice as well these this floral imagery on its brow and around it. It's almost to give it, like what you see with states and civilizations, this aura of authority, when in fact, fundamentally, all power that you find within these hierarchical institutions, be them royal or presidential, they're ultimately acquired through pure barbarism. So you see the sort of masquerade of power itself in that regard, right? It tries to almost have this floral or natural look to it, this very civilized look to it, right? This look as though it's just emerged, right, from the ground itself, from the earth itself, in a natural manner, rather than emerging through blood, fire, and the brutality. You know, conveyed against one's fellow man, right? So
Right.
there is that, and you see the hollowness as well of this. Really, what is a corpse? It's a corpse. It's a zombie feeding from a predatory zombie, of course. Hence the filed down teeth, feeding from the mind of the masses. You know, the soul of the natural.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's more than a zombie. It's more the image of the vampire, right? Because it's sort of sucking the vital energy away from this character here that is completely, destroyed psychologically due to believing all the things that it's been telling him. And so this is why, again, I mean, people like to talk about vampires and energy vampires and this and that. Yeah, the energy vampires are the ideas of energy vampires themselves, right? Because they can only act on you if you invite them in. Switch off in the sense of that emotional connection, view the narrative objectively, and you're no longer compatible with it, right? So that would be a way for this character to be released.
Well, actually, can we go back to the Osama bin Laden scene just for a
Sure, of
second?
course.
Because
Mhm.
there's something I really just quickly want to mention regarding that, and I feel it quite important. So, firstly, as you can see there, the lightning bolt, there are actually 7, I guess you could call them tendrils of
Mhm.
lightning that emerge from the sky, right? And they hit the oil pump. Now, I have somewhere in my notes this idea more fleshed out, but you'll notice, right? So that this is sort of a meander. Basically, the idea is that the system itself of based upon petroleum, which is the stabilizing motif of our entire economy as we speak right now, not just of the dollar reserve currency, but of our entire economy. What that is basically based on, again, I'm not saying this is true because, of course, this slogan of fossil fuel is completely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
joke. It's a cartoon or a caricature, but
Mhm.
the idea itself is it's meta language based around a meta narrative, or it's almost hinting at a meta narrative. The fossils themselves is this idea of the ossification that you're seeing with the ice, right? So the world itself is ossified, it's fossilized, if you will, and everything we see in the world is based around death, which of course the oil evokes, right? Almost like the diamond. The diamond is simply just the pressurized form of this dead matter, these dead things. So effectively, though the civilization evokes life, it evokes security and safety and all of this vitality, and we believe it to be safe, total safety, total, without cities, without civilization, there is no life. Ultimately, as we see in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, for example, or many other um, esoteric tales, what you find is hell is defined by this sort of illusory, inverted nature, that it appears on the surface to be, in this sense, life. But ultimately, if you scratch beneath the surface just ever so slightly and you peel away the superficiality, what you find is that it's actually based upon, in this case, death, right?
Yeah.
Total death.
Mhm.
And so this is what's being evoked here. It's and of course the meandering river is that of the sort of turbulent nature of the markets, the turbulent nature of civilization itself, the ebbs and flow of it, the wars, the respite, the crises, the respite, all of it is based around a self-regulating machine of Ordo ab Chao. And then we see
Yes.
as well that all of the economy itself is based around these choke points, major choke points, and this is what we see with the sort of new system that's being brought about. by the at least perceived as the major great powers like Russia, the US, that the way they're going to maintain the reserve currency structure and their stranglehold over the world is they're going to control these vital choke points of energy and food and fertilizer, what have you, and that will permit them an evolution, a next step, a leaping to the next system from, of course, the petrodollar. So they'll base their fiat currency system on, of course, this idealized control over the choke points of resources throughout the world.
Yes,
I think
I
that's what's
agree.
evoking there.
I agree. It is death, and it's mainly the death of the life within, more than the biological death of anything. Another thing that this brings about, this imagery, is that even though the world is already in ruins, and of course here world as, the perception world is already in ruins, it's going through its winter, through its ice age, let's say, the oil continues to pump, which means that the oil didn't end. There was always this idea of peak oil and it's going to end, and that's all BS. Oil apparently renews itself. It's very abundant. It continues to flow, and it continues to flow even though the world is in ruins. It's still there, and if you left the pumps in automatic, they will continue to extract oil. So that is I think another nudge symbolically here about a narrative point.
I totally agree with that observation. And another thing to mention too, like what we see at the beginning, sort of hinted at. Of course, later on it's more fleshed out with the scene that we just covered with the Demiurgos and almost extracting this seventh element into the sixth of that of matter. So the spirit or the soul being extracted by the material system itself. You saw that interestingly with the bifurcation of the two hemispheres of the mind vis-a-vis the lightning bolt by that of the right side, by the Draco, the dragon at the right side, and of course it had 7 pins in it. This relates to the 7 major major stars within the constellation Draco. But interestingly, within oil, because it's carbon based, of course, carbon comes from the Latin carbo, meaning charcoal, which is the product of fire. So it's the product of this continual renewal and destruction and decay. Again, that's almost hinting at a meta narrative there too of how the system functions. What you're seeing is that the 6 of matter is reaping the 7th element. So the lightning bolt, that of the Demiurgos or Draco, this sort of reptilian figure, this ever watchful symbol of the civilizational model, is reaping the spirit or the that unquantifiable soul or plasma from that of the dead element, right? From that of what's contained in the vessel of carbon. You see as well in the biblical book of Revelation, you see the opening of the 6th seal, which brings the ultimate shaking of the heavens and the earth. So within the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, it's 6 bolts. It's not 7 bolts. So what you're seeing is with the 6 bolts here, they're almost closing. They're either closing the carbon age, this sort of petrodollar, or they themselves, like what you're stating, may be it may be evoking this idea that through other means they may just continually, or they will continue this sort of reaping of the 7th element, that of the spirit or the soul, if you will. It also relates as well to the matrix of the cube, right? So within the 3-dimensional world, we can go backwards, forward, so north, south, east, west, but you can also go up and down as well, right? So these are the 6 axes of control. The 7th is that of the point. that of us. So the idea is that the cube controls the seventh, which is contained in the prison of it. Again, this evokes the same idea of abstraction, of the worldview, all of this, right? So yeah, I also as well with carbon, that of the 6 electrons, 6 neutrons, 6 protons. So all of it is really it's indicating that this sort of this worldview, this meta narrative of the system itself. So it's I think it's this stored up dead energy of the past. It maintains the vitality of this sort of undead system. This hollow undead system.
Yes,
I don't know. Yeah.
if we are to assume that the premise that oil is what is said it is, which I tend to disagree. Of course, I'm not an expert on petroleum or anything like that, but nonetheless, I think it is a part of this world that is here on, let's say, purpose, quote unquote, to be used as, you know, prevalent and has abundant as water is. So, but that's of course the worldview needs economy, needs to limit access to things. That's something that is imposed upon what would be organically there. So what we're reading here is part of the narrative of the story being told. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. It's effectively the economy, which comes from the Greek economos or economia, which means household management. So the idea is that we are almost like children contained in the house. The parents are that of the state, and what, of course, the state is doing is the economy isn't necessarily about, you can't win the game of economy, similar to Monopoly itself, right? It's designed to distribute based upon a scarcity model.
Yes.
Because of course all societies are based around conspiracy, and this is why I always laugh at when they vilify the idea of conspiracy. I mean, civilizations, all hierarchical models, are based around conspiracy, which by definition is the collusion of 2 or more people in that of a group setting to exact or to enhance their ulterior objectives at the expense of the majority and
Yes,
their interests.
if we were to take, it doesn't need to be at the expense of a majority. If we are to take any agreement between 2 people is a conspiracy, right? If we agree, okay, let's meet tomorrow at this hour to have a cup of coffee, right? That is a conspiracy because we have both agreed to do something as individuals together, right? That is basically the a premise and the basis, the foundation of conspiracy. Of course, it can be built upon and become more complex than that, but a simple agreement such as that is a conspiracy. The fact that we have agreed to be at this time and hour recording this is a conspiracy. So yeah, and another point is, yes, absolutely, that any worldview, any narrative, any abstract perception virtual world imposed upon the organic has to be based upon scarcity. There is no escape from that. It needs that, and that's why economy is vital. Absolutely.
Something else to mention too. So I've already mentioned the blood moon tetrad. There's also the belief as well in the Zohar, though I actually can't find the quote right now. But I've definitely covered it previously, I think in my Grand Sothic Cycle video, which was years and years back now. But before the belief is, and you see this in 1967, I believe, when Israel took over the Jerusalem. The idea is that before the Mashiach returns, there must be a blood moon tetrad, either that year or in the general range, within the decade where the Mashiach arrives. So all of the blood moon tetrad itself is also interesting because the tetrad is the 4. You see that for the tetragrammaton, which is the 4-letter word, the 4-letter name. This may relate back to the Orphic egg and the tendrils of the snake wrapping around the egg 4 times. Funnily enough, it's also seen on the papal crown, which you have 4 barbed layers of thorns that surround this almost egg-shaped crown. So these things are evoked incessantly. Something else to mention just with this, you'll notice they almost look like Shahed drones, these humanoid-esque figures at the back, but you'll notice they're blindfolded with the green. This is something we saw with the Demiurgos in the screen, or the background of the screen, in which he abides within, dwells within. The green is the color of spiritual unripeness. Any unripe fruit is green. So the idea is that the green itself is evoking the same idea as the cube, right? It's this prosonic civilizational model which maintains us in something that looks like, again, nature, but fundamentally is distinct from it. You also see it as well with the camouflage of Osama bin Laden here, which is it seeks to disguise itself, again, like a predator. It seeks to disguise itself in nature, right? Similar to the civilizational model. Again, it seeks to almost dress itself up in the garments of nature, but ultimately it's not natural.
It's the idea of, to inculcate the idea that there's this predator disguised or camouflaged in nature and that you can't see, and this predator is able to take down your civilization, right? Of course, here Osama bin Laden is the predator. He's got in the beard the inverted flame. Yes, he is camouflaged. He was camouflaged. It was camouflage that allowed the supposed hijackers to do their thing, and so on and so forth in the story. So, yes, it's to inculcate this idea that there's this hidden enemy, out there that can strike at any time unexpectedly. And so we have to make the world as predictable as we can and as regulated and legislated as much as we can to prevent these maverick, let's say, rogue elements, rogue predators to destroy and disrupt our artificial lives, essentially. But this is, I think, the idea, the symbolic idea here in nature. That's why he's coming forward in a camouflage suit or whatever it's called. So
yeah. So these, of course, terrorism or terrorist is the
state.
Well, yeah, but it is the state. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Interestingly, that's the deeper definition and the older definition, which is a method of government and how it exacts its policies in the real world. But the terrorist itself, in modern parlance, at least in the mainstream, after, of course, the events of 2001, it became almost synonymous with the Roman or Greek term barbarian. So these individuals that exist in the hinterland, almost in the forests, that dwell in the heart of darkness, that are unknown to us. You'll notice as well that the white of the flame within the beard, again pointing downwards, because it's almost like a ritual drawing everything down to it, and these individuals, these beings, are symbolic instruments of focusing these various destructive elements down into the world itself. You'll see contrasted with this white flame, you'll see that contrasted at the end with the flame, almost like a soul patch within that of the Christ figure, or the Antichrist figure, however you want to view it. The white itself, I've noticed, I think that's the fire of calcination. And calcination almost brings about this this sort of, it burns things to a whiteness, a pure whiteness, because of the intensity of the heat. And so you know, it's almost a ghostly flame in a sense. It's like the ghosts of our past are coming back to haunt us, right? And perhaps the ghosts of Desert Storm and things like that. You're seeing the storm within the sky as well, right? So it's almost the ghosts of the crimes of the West, or of empire in general. Eventually, it comes; those chickens come home to roost, so to say. Those
the
historical
skeletons in the
enmities.
closet. The skeletons in the closet, and I agree that flame is very ghostly in its color, and it is, yes, it is supposed, I think, I agree, to represent the ghosts, the skeletons in the closet of the US that came back to haunt and destroy. Because being a flame pointing down, in my opinion, it is a destructive flame, while a flame pointing upward would be a constructive or a vivifying flame, right? And these two, again, it's not supposed to be opposites, it's not supposed to be opponents. These two are part of the whole. So there's no two flames, there are two aspects of the same flame, and if you separate them, then it's already incomplete and out of balance. I agree.
Absolutely. And you'll notice as well with the figures behind him as well, they look like Shahed drones, firstly. But interestingly, you find with these storm and war deities, similar to Yahweh, as we see in Deuteronomy 30, either 32 or 33, perhaps 35 as well, where it talks about that he emerged from Mount Parvati, Mount Seir. Seir in Hebrew means the hairy goat, by the way, similar, of course, to the devil card. But and Mount Sinai. If you jot all of those three down on a map, it creates another triangle. Interestingly, but similar to the mountain as well, right? This generative symbol, and it's also symbolic of that place which is closest to the gods. This was also the place where the harvested crop would be taken, and the threshing floor would be. So the idea was that the wind or the air would aid in separating out the wheat from the chaff. Again, this same idea of dualism, maintaining dualism after the harvest, after the reciprocal or reciprocating renewal of the cycles or the worldview. But you'll notice too, it's very strange. It's snow-capped. They've got these white peaks. Funnily enough, it looks uncannily like Mount Kailash, which is almost this perfect triangular, very famous mountain in Tibet. And in Hindu tradition, it is regarded as the abode of Lord Shiva. In fact, it's also seen as the consort of Lord Shiva, which is Parvati. Parvati is quite literally means in Sanskrit the mountain, and Kailasha or Kailasa means crystal or gem. So you have this sort of same icy metaphor, right? It's these, the crystal, if you will, is the energy which has been solidified. It's this sort of flowing water that's been solidified into the ice.
Well, yes, and
yeah.
note that the story of Bin Laden was that he was always hiding in caves. Therefore, he is the representative of the Rex Mundi, right? The king, the hidden king under the mountain, that was plotting to take down the surface world, right? Because he couldn't be seen on the surface because he was a fugitive, etc. You know, that whole narrative. And so he plotted everything from within the mountain towards the world on the surface outside, right? I think that is also what is being represented there, because these masked figures, almost kind of KKK of sorts, I don't know, in a roundabout way, are the children of the mountain, right? So they were the ones that came out of the caves to enact judgment upon the surface world, which is a bit like that story that what was it? The
Time Machine.
Time
Similar.
Machine.
Yeah,
yes,
the Morlocks. Yeah,
yeah,
I was
The
thinking of that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and the Eloi. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the Eloi, Yeah, no problem, man. I'll just wrap up here. Yeah, so no, absolutely, you're spot on. And this relates to Athanasius Kircher's and Bartholomew of Parma, which I've been talking with Eros about, this idea of the mystery of the interior and such. This idea that the earth is a self-regulating machine through the self-induction of you know, how would you call it? God, the word eludes me now. You know, periodic resets through self-destruction. You know, self-sabotage, self-ruin. You know, so it maintains itself through that. Yeah, and of course Shiva means this creative destruction, this force of creative destruction. Just really quickly as well, you'll notice that the Sala that he's doing is that's a Shia like Salah. The white turban itself evokes the sheiks of the Shia as well. You wear a black turban if you're a Sayyid, which is a relative, a direct descendant of Muhammad. And we also see as well the black wings, which is almost this inversion. It's also symbolic of the angel of destruction. And then he's wearing the CIA. So Osama bin Laden was Sunni, by the way. So the idea is that the Sunnis and the Shias may combine at one point as this sort of ghostly spectral force that destroys us, similar to what you see at the end of Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. And the CIA is that of all of this being maintained and cultivated by the system itself.
And directed from there. Yes.
And directed from there.
Yes.
And this... Just quickly as well, and this will be my final point, and then you can jump in, man. The CIA also relates to the Hebrew term Sia, which means barren, and it's actually it's the first part of the hidden compounded word Zion. So Sia on quite literally means the holy pillars, on being the transliteration of Yahweh, which is a Kemetic word for Heliopolis. The native word for that city. Heliopolis is a Greek term for that. And so the on is the Hebrew transliteration of that. So holy pillar or holy place of the barren land. So the idea is relating to the harvest and all of this, right? Creative destruction. And
it's the Tower of Babel, because the Tower of Babel exists in the desert of the real, right? Quote unquote. If you remember in the Matrix, when Neo awoke, he was in the desert of the real, and then he went to Zion, right? So that is what it represents. It's the Tower of Babel, the last redoubt, in a sense. But another thing that I wanted to point out, just in closing, because I've got to go soon, is that note how in the narrative, another thing that is, of course, the oppositions, the binaries, etc., but another thing that is reinforced as a binary is this class warfare, which is very Marxist in its inception. Of course, Marx itself is a character in the narrative, but beside the point, because the ones that defeated the millionaires at the top, the exploiters, were the underclass, right? The poor countries, that were being exploited for oil, which is the same theme we see in Dune, right? That were being exploited for the oil and lived in poverty and lived in great economic difficulty and so on. And they were the ones that, through their class warfare, revolted and got to topple the ones at the top, the exploiters at the top. So this is a theme that repeats over and over, and that's why, of course, it creates these perpetual cycles, because eventually those that were the underclass will become the overlords, and the other ones invert, and therefore they have to rebel against the overlords in the next stage or in the next iteration of the same mask, right? And that's what keeps the cycle going, is that the tables keep turning, right? This round you play lord and I play slave, and then I rebel against you, and then in the next iteration we invert, right? And we continue going. So I wanted to point that out as well. In closing, because I need to go now, but Listen, man, this is as well as always a fascinating discussion. You always bring up stuff that I would never think. I would never think of the some of the things you're able to dig up. I would never, bring up myself. I would never imagine. And I hope that I was able to also bring a few things with my different perspectives, or different approach, not perspective, to enrich your own views and also those of the viewers of this video. Don't worry, we will continue. We've advanced like 5 seconds in this episode, but we will continue.
It's a slow war of attrition with this short film.
It's a siege. It's a siege.
It's a siege. Yeah. Exactly.
We're waiting for your food to run out. Kidding.
I've got one more thing I'll mention, but you can leave if you want, man. And I'll just this will be like a 30-second addendum, and it's just on the sort of Sri Lanka connection. But we'll close it out here, and then I'll make this final addendum at the end. But if you need to leave, man. But absolutely no,
Okay.
I wouldn't have you on this series with me if I really value what you bring to the table, because you bring up things that I would never think of too, like what we were talking about with the chess thing, the idea of the worldview, and sort of the sort of constricting magnetic field, you could say, that's established by that, and I mean, yeah, absolutely. This is a fascinating series that we're undertaking.
Then we're both grateful, and I hope the audience is too. But
exactly.
Do make then I leave my regards to everyone and to you too, and I'll see you in the next episode. But do please make your closing statements that you want to make. I will leave this on. Although I will be absent. Okay? Thank you.
All right, man. Okay. So just really, really quickly to make sort of the final points of this, there's things we could even mention on Osama bin Laden, that term itself. He also went by, I believe, Tim Osman. So we have the Oz again, right? This idea that you see, of course, with the idea of the Wizard of Oz. That was also utilized in MK Ultra. But you see that the idea is that they have to go along this sort of yellow brick road, which is very similar to what you see with the Moon Tarot card of the crustacean emerging from the waters, the shallow waters, onto the land. Almost this chimeric creature of both the land and the water, this amphibian, with a hard shell, of course, similar to the eggshell of the Orphic egg, that has the embryo of the Phanes Protogenos, the next cycle, if you will. That itself is evoked by the crustacean, but you'll notice it has to go over 5 hills in that Moon Tarot card. And beside it, from to the left, is that of the Canis Major, which is Sirius, and Canis Minor, which also has esoteric connotations, but we won't get into that there. So it's the big dog and the little dog, if you will. Anyway, it goes through the 2 pillars of Boaz and Yakin, which is, you see the black and the white, and it has 4 black dots round these white pillars. But the idea that you see there is almost what's evoked within the clouds as well, right? You see the sort of valleys leading up to this blood moon tetrad, this crescent moon, and so with that, almost what you're seeing with the Wizard of Oz connection is that fundamentally all of them are misguided. That of Toto, that of the the lion, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and that of Dorothy herself, because they think that their redemption can be found in the Emerald City, right? Again, that green, right? The green of spiritual unripeness. Again, similar to Osama bin Laden, right? Even Osama, Osama, which may be another anglicized play on words. They feel that the wizard will actually have the answers to all of their questions, but fundamentally, when they look behind the curtain, again, this is symbolic. The Emerald City and the Wizard of Oz is symbolic of the civilization itself. It almost appears to be a savior, right? It appears to have safety and security in mind, but fundamentally, it's this devouring, lying, serpentine deceiver of the seeker of knowledge and truth. That which seeks to, like, again, the Emerald City, the crystal, it wants to completely control you and to maintain you in this sort of field of total control and domination, and the domination of your will, and the eclipsing of your will by its will. So, it's a theater of the absurd, a theater of control. So, another thing to mention is what we're seeing in all of this is ultimately the hyper-sigilization, right? This projection of various subconscious or subconsciously tailored elements, such as the Blood Moon Tetrad, that of Osama bin Laden, all of this. And what it's meant to evoke is this idea of yes, major military escalation, even geographic coordinates, perhaps, of this escalation, as we'll see in the previous scene. But it's almost, it's a chilling, it has a chilling effect on the viewer, which, yes, it evokes a potential transformation of the ego, through tapping into this collective unconscious. But it's also indicating a sort of geopolitical architectonics, right? If you will, this control through the abstractions, through the sigils themselves, right, which you're seeing on the screen. It's almost a psychological, social priming of the viewer for what will come in the future, what's perhaps already now upon us, 13 years or so after the release of this IPEC GOAT 2. So, funnily enough, that this will link into a previous scene where we see, if I can just pull it back ever so slightly. So we see here, now this is, I believe, India and Sri Lanka. We'll get into what perhaps this means at the front. Now, this relates to the Iris Dena. Iris, of course, is the Iranian, the Islamic Republic of Iran ship, Iris, which is Greek for that of the rainbow. Now, the rainbow is the covenant. It's the sign of the covenant. In fact, it relates, funnily enough, to this idea as well of the dad, right? The brilliance of color, the resplendent, radiant colors that come about in the reaction or the reactive crucible of this sort of, or of the chaotic Negredo, and that produces the Chevret Hakalim of the next stage, of the contraction of the next stage, which produces that of the perpetuation of the worldview, the perpetuation of the cycle itself, from world age to world age, right? Again, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages, or a new order of the next age to come. So the perpetuation of the cycles through that of decay. So you actually see that, funnily enough, with the Tibetan view of Mount Kailash, which is the axis mundi. It's also similar to, it is Mount Meru, quite literally. It's the manifestation of that, the mythological or mythical cosmic pillar, that which the Asuras, the children of the dawn, are seeking to climb perpetually. Again, these fallen angel or fallen angelic archetypes. It's also known in Tibet as Kang Rinpoche, which is the precious jewel of the snow. Again, there's the ice again, that ice or icy idea. In the Bun or Bon religion of Tibet, which is their folk religion, it's also known as Yungdrung Gu Tseg, which is known as the 9-story Suastika mountain. It's a foundational spiritual site, rather. So something to mention with this is that Osama bin Laden, its etymology, or the etymology of that name, literally means lion, of the son of the one who witnessed Laden, right? Osama or Uama means lion, and Bin means son of, and Laden means the one who witnessed. So lion of the one who witnessed, right? So interesting. We see the lion here, right? The lion is almost the symbol that you see at the end, of course, of Yaldabaoth. It is the symbol of the devouring predator, the king of the jungle. That architect of this entire cycle, he has the head of the lion. But interestingly, we see with Sri Lanka, now interestingly with Sri Lanka, that is also known as Sima, which is Sanskrit for lion. There's also an Arabic name for it, which also translates to that of lion. I think it's similar to Sima. So what you're seeing is that the lion is invoked by all of this, right? And like what we're seeing with the white turban of Osama bin Laden, the white turban indicates that of the false purity, right? It's the al-abyad, but it's not a sight. It's, meaning the purity, the light, the religious legitimacy, but it's not necessarily the Sayyid. It's not a descendant of the Prophet, who often, of course, wears the black turban. And coupled that with the black wings, those are the shadow reality, the scavenger of the matrix, the dark harvester, right? The Sia or the Baron, the wings of the vulture, the one who makes barren the previous civilization or cycle to begin a new one. So yes, the sinking of the iris Dena, and the Dena also evokes this high mountain. Dena, I believe, relates to the highest mountain in the Zagros mountain range, which was known as the Shield of the Aryans, quite interestingly. But so the sinking of the Iris Dena occurred, funnily enough, near as damn it on the March 3rd, March 4th blood moon, which was part of a blood moon tetrad for this year. Now, interestingly, in Zoroastrian and Persian tradition, Dena translates to that which is seen or observed, representing spiritual insight, conscience, and religion. Can also relate to the materiality of, or the manifestation of God, right, in a sort of material way through miracles or something along those lines. But Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, is the island fortress of the demon king Ravana, which is situated across the waters at the tip of India. It is a threshold location representing the boundary between the earthly realm and the chaotic abyss. So the macro ritual, which is to have the US, the current imperial eagle, torpedo the Dena, which is insight into the abyssal waters of Leviathan, rather, just hours after the total eclipse of the blood moon on March 3rd, acts as a massive ritual of the, I guess you could call it, the sort of Kelly Pa, right? The sort of primordial forces of chaos. The blood moon represents the obscuring of the feminine lunar reflection of divine light, creating the perfect astrological darkness to plunge human insight deeper into the trauma of war and the void economy of F equals minus F, this sort of dialectical system. So to mention more on Sri Lanka, we actually find that Sri Lanka itself, its etymology, Shri is a Sanskrit title of veneration. It actually means holy or radiant or resplendent, and Lanka simply means island. Now, altogether it means resplendent island, but interestingly, Shri, which is radiant or resplendent or radiance, interestingly relates to the Hebrew Zohar, which also means radiant or radiance. Zohar, quite literally, is the book of radiance, right? I mean, that's very interesting in and of itself. So this sort of false light. We also see this with Sauron in Lord of the Rings, where he appears as Anatar, which is in Elvish, the Lord bearing gifts or the Lord of gifts. And he uses this sort of resplendent or radiant, this visage of light to beguile and to deceive the elves of Eregion, I believe it's called, and most notably that of Celebrimbor, who eventually created the Rings of Power. Of course, under this sort of deception by Sauron himself as Anatar. Again, it's a very Luciferian idea. A demon will not deceive you through darkness; it will deceive you through appearing as a being of light. You also see this in the New Testament as well. Now, so geographically, it hangs like a single teardrop falling from the Indian subcontinent into the vast abyss of the Indian Ocean, right? It's almost like a peril in and of itself, a peril within the abyss. It's also known as the peril of the Indian Ocean, funnily enough, too. So the fortress of Ravana, in the ancient Hindu epic, the Ramayana, Lanka is not just an island. It is the impenetrable fortress of Ravana, a 10-headed demon king. 10 heads, of course, 10 vessels, or Sephira, relating to the Sephirotic tree. Ravana represents the ultimate manifestation of the unchecked material ego. He is the demiurgic warden who kidnaps Sita, the personification of the divine feminine, Sophia, or the Shekinah, and holds her hostage in his island stronghold. Again, as we see, and as we have brought up previously, that of the divine feminine being the soul, right? The material world feeds from the soul by mimicking it. It mimics the natural, right? It camouflages itself within the natural. It appears natural. It appears as though it has authority, that it's not born from that of the purely material, the egoic, and the barbaric, and that of brutality and bloodletting. All civilizations and empires do this. So Sri Lanka acts as the geographic and esoteric threshold between the structured earthly world, the subcontinent, and the deep, untamed clithotic waters of the lower astral plane, the chaos, if you will, right? So ultimately, it's this archonic system that relies on keeping human consciousness trapped in the lower ventricles of fear and survival. And so tying this in with the Dena, which is the mountain and the rainbow, as we've mentioned. So the mountain is the axis mundi, like Mount Kailasha. So in every esoteric tradition, the mountain is the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar that connects the earth to heaven. It is the arduous rocky slope that the Capricornian sea goat must climb to escape the lower waters, or the Leviathan, or the shell. The rainbow, the Atahakarana. Esoterically, the rainbow is the Atahakarana in Sanskrit, the rainbow bridge that connects the lower. This is also seen as the Bifrost Bridge. The lower material mind to the higher divine self is the refraction of the single pure divine light, the Ein Sof Hour, into the 7 visible frequencies, the 7 chakras, the 7 planetary spheres, and by this demiurgos, this lord of the earth, as it's termed in sort of the cross-cultural, cross-mythological traditions. So the idea is that by the sinking of the Iris Dena, by the submarine, that by violently destroying the symbol of the rainbow bridge, the Iris Dena, precisely at the threshold of the mythological demon fortress of Ravana, the global theatre is being subjected to a massive trauma ritual. The collective psyche, the sigh or the trident, the 3 ventricles, as well as being told that the path upward is closed. The stairway to heaven is out of action, if you will, and that the bridge is broken, and that the only reality left is the dark, freezing water of the abyss and the endless cycle of the torpedo and the submarine, which is symbolic of the worldview itself, of the various cycles themselves, right? It is the ultimate manifestation of the zootropic reality spinning ever faster, designed to force humanity to look strictly through the narrow slit of war and scarcity and suffering, entirely forgetting about the sky above the heaven, the untold, unseen potential that is mankind, the hidden treasure. So the Sri Lanka, the resplendent island, in the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, Book of Radiance, is itself the emanation of the divine light into the physical world as it's depicted, both in Kabbalah and within general folklore of the subcontinent. It's also known as Quilon, which derives from the Portuguese Silao. And so that itself almost unlocks a massive esoteric connection in and of itself, right? The Silao is from that Pali word. It wasn't Sanskrit, it was Pali, from Sahala, and which itself derives from the Sanskrit word Simhala, which means lion. Simha means lion. Therefore, Simhala Dvapa, the ancient name for the island, literally translates to the island of lions, or the dwelling place of lions. Again, this relates to the Gnostic demiurge Yaldabaoth, who is the lion-headed serpent, or the lion-headed worm. So by sinking in the worm itself, creates negative spaces, that which creates lacunas, these negative spaces which allow for generation of new configurations of life. That itself is what you're seeing generated through this Abkeo energy of the demiurge. It hollows out the mind, as we saw with the egghead child. And so from that is created the potential of new life. So it's a sort of necessary evil in and of itself. So by sinking the Dena, the insight, off the coast of Quilon, the island of the lion, right at the threshold of the Shri, the Zohar, the Splendor, the Radiance, the geopolitical ritual reflects perfectly this demiurgic trap. The lion of the material matrix devouring spiritual insight before it can reach the divine radiance of its own perpetuation. So also another connection to make with Sri Lanka and the Iris Dena and Ceylon is that of Thomas More's Utopia, which takes place on the island of Ceylon. And he's part of a series of dialogue writers who were utopians, probably of the same sort of outgrowth of esoteric and secret societies that were mere branches of this sort of Kabbalistic nexus point. Again, which would later crystallize into the Masonic order and the Rosicrucian order later on. But Thomas More, in his work Utopia, in fact, he coined the term utopia, literally meaning no place, a place of nothingness, a place of the Ayin of the eye, a place of Saturn, if you will, the Demiurgos, the perpetuation of somethingness through the sort of through the architecture of the nothingness, the architecture of hollowness in and of itself. So what we find is that, yes, Sanskrit sima can mean lion, but in Hebrew shema means to hear or to listen. The shem is also the name. So the sema, the lion's roar, if you will, the lion represents that apex of solar material power. The Lion of Judah, the astrological Leo ruled by the sun, or the demiurgic lion-headed serpent, Yaldabaoth. The roar of the lion is the active outward emanation of force in the physical world. It's almost disharmonious. It invokes fear, it invokes a trembling, as opposed to a sort of a dissonance, as opposed to harmony. So the Shema, which is the divine receptacle, the Shema Yisrael, Hero Israel, the Shema prayer, is the central declaration of faith in the unified divine within Judaism. Esoterically, hearing is the ultimate act of receptivity. It is the feminine receptive principle, bina, or understanding, receiving the divine vibration, or the vibration of the dissonant Yaldabaoth, the architects. Also, it relates to this idea of chronoreceptivity, the receptivity of time itself, this architecture of the material world of the civilization. So if Sama is the active vibration, the word spoken into matter, into the void, Shema is the conscious ear that decodes it. When the two align, the soul is no longer deafened by the roar of the demiurgic lion. It actually hears the divine Shem or name hidden within the noise. The island of the lion, Kilon, almost becomes the place where the true name is heard, through, of course, that of the fire of destruction. So Thomas More, Kilon, and the Threshold of Utopia, that itself is very interesting. So in Book 1 of Utopia by Thomas More, the fictional traveler, Raphael Hythlode, describes his journey returning from the perfected society of Utopia, which is in the island of Kilon. His route back to the real world specifically passes through Taprobani, the ancient Greek name for Kilon or Sri Lanka, before heading to Calicut or Calcutta. Why did More place Kilon at the edge of his perfected world? Well, it's the threshold of reality, as we established previously. Kilon or Sri Lanka represents the geographic and mythical threshold between the structured world and the abyss, which is the fortress of the ego. For Hythlode to return from Utopia to Europe or Europa, he must pass through the island of the lion. It is the esoteric checkpoint between the divine dream and the rigid sort of void economy reality of 16th century Europe. So utopos, the true ayin, the word utopia, which was coined by More, which has its roots from Greek, meaning no place, not, and topos, good place, or it can also mean good place as well, if you want to etymologically define it as such. Esoterically, utopia is not necessarily a political blueprint. It is the Kabbalistic ayin, quite literally. It's the nothingness or the void itself, which is the black stone, the axis mundi, the Mount Kailash, the Mount Meru, at the center of the world. It is the realm that exists outside of Metatron's cube, or is Metatron's cube in and of itself. It's free from the scarcity model and the property-driven ledgers of the demiurge, but it itself is the author of these systems and these instruments of control. So it is the Betelgeuse stone, the black stone itself, the mountain of the north, the fortress of Angmar in and of itself. The essence, the quintessence of Melkor or Morgoth or Sauron. So, while More was outwardly a strict Orthodox Catholic and famously martyred for it, he was embedded in the Renaissance esoteric revival nonetheless. More was profoundly influenced by Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, the undisputed father of Christian Kabbalah. Pico was the philosopher who famously synthesized Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonism and Jewish Kabbalah into a single cohesive system, most notably in his Oration on the Dignity of Man. And we also see in 1510, Thomas More actually translated Pico's biography and a collection of his works into English, The Life of Pico. More absorbed Pico's Kabbalistic idea that humanity is a chameleon, capable of sinking to the level of mindless beasts, the rank and file dead in the underworld or the asphodel meadows, or ascending to the level of angels through divine intellect and the Shema, hearing the divine. Similar, of course, to the Capricornian beast, exists both as a potential of the goat climbing the fatal slope to heaven and that of the abyss, that of the unseen animalistic drives of chaos. So this is exactly what we're seeing here within the true liberation of the no place, right? We all must pass through the Negredo or the eye of the Ayin. This is what it's evoking in that scene. You'll also see at the front, it's either a pointing of the finger, which I don't think it actually is. I think it's more along the lines of the shape of the oyster, which is, of course, evoking the peril. Sri Lanka is the peril of the Indian Ocean, as it's known as. The peril is also this idea of grace. It's this idea of the potential of the escape, this potential of man to climb beyond the animalistic impulses of the architecture of the domesticating demiurgos, the farmer, who turns us all into animals through, of course, the platforms, right? The plateau forms, those which form us into the plateau of our own divine energy, and the transmittance and transcendence of that energy up the fatal slope. It keeps us on that plateau, that flat plane of control, which is, of course, the Kabbalistic cosmology of the world, the flat Earth. And also, as well, moreover, it does this through social media feeds and the herd mentality and the herd immunity, right? The barn animal has the feed within the trough, and it's a constant thing. It's to fatten one up, to keep them in this slumbering malaise of laziness and a sort of idleness, an anodyne state, pure dullness, the sort of attention economy of compulsive engagement, the controlling of the body, then the mind, and then the soul, the weaponization of focus, through, again, the world stage, right? They turn us into these disjointed frames, this hyper-narrow psychic tunneling of continuous acting, essentially, right? They turn us into actors, pure egoic personas, masks worn by actors. So I think that's my sort of final take on all of that. I think that's ultimately what's going on in these scenes, and you'll notice as well later on we see the embryo. It's almost praying. The embryo is praying right there, praying for grace. You'll see the Anubis again. Its left eye is there because we have to emerge from the boat of the ego which carries us on the river Styx. We have to emerge from the materiality, which is the left eye. We emerge from the carbon world as the diamonds, pressurized in this world of economic anxiety, of the debt of abundance, well, not the debt of abundance, the debt of inverted abundance, and the threat of violence, constant violence, right? This shark in the waters, whilst we are in the sort of burning house of the Betel. And that relates to the Beatilis, or the Betalis stone, the black stone, right? This is how the system forces human consciousness down into the lowest chakras of the root of one's survival instincts, where the infinite potential is simply just controlled. It's fixated on the immediate spinning frames of the zoetrope in this sense. That in terms of the anticipation of the next threat, the next crisis, the next engineered crises, because again, that's how the self-regulating machine of the earth continues, as we see in Athanasius Kircher's Pyro Phylacteorum. So the fear itself becomes almost a chain that binds the mind to the illusion of the system. So it's a culture of entrainment and of entrapment through entertainment as well. And the scarcity model, which is the whip. The entertainment is the narcotic that sort of goes hand in hand with that. And so we rapidly see this dreamlike sequence of moving archetypes, be it celebrities, political saviors, even religious saviors, of course, as well, and the manufactured psychodramas. And this all comes together to simulate both emotional catharsis in a very negative way, but it's so that the soul feels it has experienced something profound, again, something natural, without ever actually evolving or transcending the matrix in which that false experience is occurring. So it's the ultimate form of pacification. The soul goes into a state of profound slumber, mesmerized by the flashing lights, and convinced that the shadows on the cave wall are the Platonic cave wall are entirely that of existence, and nothing exists out of that in any sort of term, be it quantum or in the immediate. So it's a narrowing of potential, and a sort of collapse of the wave function of reality by the construing of the observer into a state of pure, perpetual and perennial consternation through fear and things that we've mentioned. So it keeps people away from the Zoe, right? The divine spiritual life. And it again, it's the reverse of that in the Oz, which is the strength, which is the theatre of the absurd and the whip, the false light of the Promethean flame of the technological advancement, as opposed to the spiritual advancement. The two are mutually exclusive, it would appear, right? As we technologically advance, we don't actually proportionally spiritually advance, we disproportionately retreat in terms of our spiritual understanding and knowledge. So we see this understanding here that's found within mythology and even the breaking apart of these symbols itself. And you also see there's 14 layers to that ear too. Again, the 14 relates to the Assyrian mystery, but it's the 14 segments of the hand, which is quite literally the detail, the breaking down of the razon, which is the Hebrew for will. This is why you have the age of reason, the age of razon, the age of will, the age of the son of Ra, the age of the son of the sun, the age of the false son, the instrument of the will. This is why the Lord goes all the way back to Bel Marduk, right? And that was abbreviated just to Bel or Baal. This goes to Amaru or Amarutu. Amarutu is the bull calf of the sun god, or literally the son of the sun. So it's this idea of the instrument of the will. Fundamentally, ultimately, instead of becoming a servant of the will, actually seeks to imprison the will, imprison the soul itself. So this is the idea that Clagus puts forward, that the will, or the Geist, the spirit as well, is also known in German, that sort of fiery invasiveness that the soul requires, but it also is the bane of the soul itself simultaneously. So the Geist is the adversary of the soul. The will is the adversary of the soul, right? Of course, it's the instrument of the soul, but eventually that instrument comes to eclipse the will itself, at least materially. And it destroys the potential of the person from connecting once again with that divine spiritual life, with connecting with Zoe or grace, or again the peril, that which is symbolized as the peril. So thank you for joining me. That's pretty much all I have to mention upon this. And until the next episode, I thank you. Bye bye.